Welcome to the 38th meeting of this committee.
Standing Order 108 Sub 2 and the motion that we adopted on May 6, 2021 to receive a briefing on the current situation in Ukraine. And members, you'll recall that we had agreed to a joint meeting with the Standing Committee on National Defence. National Defence currently has a meeting that is suspended, and parliamentary procedure does not allow for a committee to hold two meetings simultaneously. So for that reason, the official joint meeting is not able to take place. However, we most certainly and warmly welcome members of the Standing Committee on National Defence to join us this afternoon and to take part in this meeting as guests.
In order to assure a smooth running of the meeting, I encourage all participants to mute their microphones when they're not speaking. And when you will have 30 seconds left in your questions, I will notify you with this piece of paper. And as usual, interpretation is available with the globe icon at the bottom of your screen.
Welcome our witnesses from the Embassy of Ukraine in Canada. We have with us this afternoon His Excellency Andriy Shevchenko, Ambassador of Ukraine to Canada, Colonel Viktor Siromaka, Defense, Naval and Air Attaché, and Mr. Alexei Lyashenko, Political Counselor. Ambassador Shevchenko, it's a pleasure to give you the floor for your opening remarks of 7 minutes, if you please, and then we'll go to questions from members of the two committees. Please go ahead, Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Honorable Chair and all the members. I greatly appreciate your deep interest in the recent alarming events in Ukraine and the neighborhood. We were impressed with the swift Canadian reaction to the escalation by Russia, and we truly felt this overwhelming support across the party lines from the Ukrainian Canadian Congress and from the wider Canadian public. These events will have a direct impact on the national security of Canada. Therefore, it is in the interest of Canadian public that you and other Canadian decision makers are well informed on the matter. And to kick off the conversation, I want to share with you just three thoughts. First, the Russian military buildup along the Ukrainian border is not over. Even after the Russians said they would pull out the troops, a significant portion of the deployments stayed, and the heavy weaponry, including thousands of tanks and armored vehicles, stayed as well. Officially, all that stays for Zapad 2021 or West 2021, which is a major military drill scheduled for September. However, even today, it is an immediate threat to us at this very moment. So we see no changes for better along the border in the occupied territories of Donbass, where the Russians have ready to use two army corps. And of course, as we speak, the Russians continue to turn the Crimean Peninsula into a huge military base, which is supposed to boost Moscow's capabilities in the Black Sea and in the Mediterranean. So again, we're witnessing the biggest military buildup by the Russians against Ukraine since the invasion of 2014, and it is very far from being over. My second thought is about the wider context. In fact, nothing between Russia and its any given neighbor is bilateral. There is always a wider geography behind every aggressive move that Putin makes. And this is why we should also watch closely all the unfriendly actions towards the Baltic nations or Moldova, which is struggling desperately to get out of the Russian grip, or Belarus. And it was very important that Canada was not a bystander in the situation with the forced landing of the Ryanair flight. We see increasing Russian military activity in the European skies and a major military buildup in the Arctic. Let's also not overlook the cyber attacks in the United States. So to summarize, we should see this as a massive, dangerous, multi-level, anti-Western operation with many tactical goals and ways to challenge the free world, and with one strategic purpose, which is to deconstruct the existing international order. And this is why, and this is my third comment, Canada and its NATO allies should rethink, upgrade, and boost their response to the Russian aggressive actions. We are pleased to see Jens Stoltenberg, NATO's Secretary General, identifying Russia as a major threat to the alliance in the next 10 years. We are looking forward to the upcoming NATO summit, and we believe this is the time we should finally lay down a clear path for Ukraine to become a NATO member. We do thank Canada for your commitment to the 2008 decision by the Bucharest summit to go ahead with the membership action plan for Ukraine and Georgia. Today, 13 years later, we must finally start moving forward. We want NATO to utilize our defense and intelligence capabilities, our experience, our soft power influence across the region, and our readiness to stand up for the free world. And they truly believe that Canada is in a perfect position to discuss the benefits of having Ukraine in NATO with your NATO's allies. We want your voice to be heard at the Brussels summit and at all the conversations about the future of the security system in Europe and the site. Well, as a former parliamentarian myself, I know that time is a very hard currency in the parliamentary settings. It can possibly be beaten in value only by this undivided attention that I'm very privileged to have. So I'm going to save the rest of my time for the benefit of a free conversation. And I would like to brainstorm together on what Canada and Ukraine can do to secure peace and order. I'll be happy to talk in details about Operation Unifier and sanctions against the aggressor, about defense assistance and intelligence exchange, about the Crimean platform and the recent developments in Belarus and wider neighborhood. Honorable Chair, I'm looking forward to this meaningful and very timely conversation. Thank you.
Ambassador, thank you so much for your opening remarks. We will now go to round one of questions. These are 6-minute segments that go to members of parliament. And leading us off this afternoon will be Mr. Chung. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank Ambassador Shevchenko and the delegation from the Embassy of Ukraine for joining our committee today. It's good to see you, Ambassador, again. Canada and Ukraine have historic ties, as you know. Over 1 million Canadians trace their roots back to Ukraine. On December 2nd, 1991, Prime Minister Mulroney recognized Ukraine's independence, and Canada became the first Western country to do so. Under Prime Minister Harper, Canada strongly condemned Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea and interference in Ukraine and commenced Operation Unifier. And the current government, led by Prime Minister Trudeau, continues to support Ukraine with the continuance of Operation Unifier, the Canadian training-led mission in Ukraine. We strongly support Ukraine's independence and its territorial integrity. And so we thank you for taking the time to appear in front of our committee today. Ambassador, a year and a half ago, our two countries were tied together in tragedy with the shooting down of Ukrainian Airlines Flight 752 by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which killed 85 Canadians and Canadian residents. The families of those victims are still seeking justice. Recently, the Ontario Superior Court concluded that the IRGC committed a terrorist act. We've been calling on the government to list the IRGC as a terrorist entity under the Criminal Code. Does Ukraine consider the downing of Flight 752 to be a terrorist act, and what is its position on the shooting down of this airliner?
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I should tell you that we do share this pain about this very tragic incident. And I feel that it's extremely important for Canada and Ukraine to closely cooperate on this matter. And this means proper investigation, which is not happening right now. It means fair financial compensations for the families of the victims. And it also means that we should find proper ways to hold responsible those people who should be who were responsible for downing of the plane. We at the moment we are considering different scenarios how we can move forward. Probably you know that as we speak, and an Iranian delegation is in Kiev, Ukraine, to continue negotiations with Ukraine. Ukraine speaks on behalf of all the 5 countries involved, and I would like to reassure that that Iran won't be able to split us. We will speak with one voice, and this is the way to move forward.
Thank you.
And following your question, yes, we're considering all the possible scenarios and options.
Ukraine borders Belarus. So a week ago, President Lukashenko ordered a MiG-29 to force down Ryanair flight 4978. Like Ukrainian Airlines Flight 752 and Malaysian Airlines Flight 17, a flight which was downed over Ukraine, which killed hundreds of Dutch citizens. That downing of Ryanair Flight 4978 could have ended in disaster. We believe that Alexander Lukashenko must be held responsible for this violation of international air transport rules. What is Ukraine's position on the forcing down of this Ryanair flight, and what action is Ukraine taking in international fora such as ICAO, seeing that 3 flights in the last 7 years connected to Ukraine have been affected by authoritarian states?
We share your view of the situation. We see this as a forced landing. I think Canada did the right thing with a swift reaction to this situation. Ukraine has banned flights to and from Belarus, and we cooperate with our European and international allies on further sanctions against Belarus. Just one more thought on this. We all should realize that it would be very difficult to imagine that Lukashenko made that decision without having President Putin behind him. We see Belarus becoming integrated into the Russian military and political decision, and this is the way we should see it.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador. A final question. As you know, Canada is helping Ukraine to fight corruption and strengthen the rule of law. Mr. Michael Yurkovich, a Canadian, has built 54 megawatts of power projects in Ukraine, investing a total of $65 million. One of those projects is a 10.5 megawatt solar project in Nikopol. However, the project appears to have been blocked by Igor Kolomoisky, a Ukrainian billionaire, and Ukraine's courts do not appear to be upholding the rule of law. So I have 2 questions. First, has the Canadian government made any representation to you on this issue? And secondly, what is your government doing to address this situation?
We follow closely the situation, and I should tell you that we greatly cherish this very important Canadian investment into the Ukrainian economy, and specifically because it's about renewable energy, so it's a very important one. Yes, this issue has been raised across the party lines by the Canadian officials and by the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. So this is a good sign that we should take the situation very seriously, and this is the way the Ukrainian government treats it.
Okay.
It's in the courts. We hope there'll be a good solution.
Very quick question. Zina, I have a few seconds left. What is Ukraine's position on the $15 billion canal Turkey wants to build between the Black Sea and the Sea of Marmara?
I wouldn't be able to comment on that today, but I should tell you that we think that all the interests should be taken into account when major decisions are taken.
Thank you very much. Ambassador. Thank you, Mr. Chong. Thank you, Ambassador. We will now go to the next member of Parliament. That's Mr. Fonseca for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Ambassador Shevchenko and your colleagues. It's wonderful to have you here. The last time we spoke, of course, was through our Canada-Ukrainian Parliamentary Friendship Group, and to have our chair, Yvonne Baker, here is terrific. And at that time, we had an opportunity to speak about our relations, and of course, Canada stands firmly behind our friends of Ukraine and has led successive operations and help with Ukraine as well as funds. So, since the illegal occupation of Crimea, Canada since 2014, I believe, has assisted Ukraine with over $800 million and through different programs. I do want to ask you, because you brought up in your remarks how you want to bolster these actions and sanctions on Russia. And since 2014, the United States, Canada, the EU, we've imposed targeted sanctions on certain Russian and Ukrainian individuals associated with the Russian intervention in the Donbass region and Crimea, and against certain sectors of the Russian economy. So I want to ask you, what effect have these sanctions had so far on the conflict in the Donbass region and Crimea? And I also want to ask you about, should we, in terms of you saying bolstering those actions, should we put more people on that list? Do you have a list to provide to us in terms of other individuals as further retaliatory actions and the amassing of these troops now in the area? Should we be putting more people on that list?
Thank you, Mr. Fonseca. Well, first of all, the sanctions do work, and there are very strong and convincing studies which actually calculate the damage which was done to the Russian economy by the sanctions, and this means that it has slowed down economic growth of Russia. And in very practical things, it means that they can spend much less money for waging the war against Ukraine and for waging other clear, aggressive actions against the free world. So they do work. And there are several avenues for our consideration for the future. First, it's the Magnitsky Act. And it was a very important decision by the Canadian Parliament, and we would like to see it working against those Russian individuals who are responsible for corruption and for human rights violation. Second, it's sectoral sanctions. I think we should think about SWIFT and everything which goes with that. And also, I think we should pay attention to how Russia deals with its sovereign debt. I think we should make sure that the Russians do not have an easy walk finding money in the international markets to cover their sovereign debt. One final comment is we should look into the Black Sea activities, and we should probably punish Russia and its ships for violating the international rules.
Okay, that's excellent. And would you be able to provide us with a list of those actions that you would like to see, as well as I said, other individuals? I believe the list that I see here is at about 440 Russian and Ukrainian individuals and entities that should be added to that list to strengthen, as you say, the actions and sanctions on Russia. The question I have now is more of a domestic one, Ambassador, but it's very important in my riding of Mississauga, East Cooksville. So we have a large diaspora community here in Mississauga. We have one of the biggest Ukrainian churches here in Mississauga, East Cooksville, and many constituents come to me and they want their relatives to be able to visit, and be it there could be a new birth in the family or some other something else has happened in terms of a milestone, and it's sometimes been difficult to be able to get the visa to be able to get Ukrainians to be able to visit. But I do know that visa was waived within Europe, and Ukrainians are able to travel through Europe, and it's been gone for a number of years, and things have worked well. So what is it that Canada needs to do to be able to get that visa waived so that Ukrainians would be able to travel without that visa restriction?
Visa-free regime for our citizens is a major goal that we have, and we are very committed to working towards that. That is why Ukraine has canceled visas for Canadian citizens. So any Canadian citizen can come to Ukraine for up to 6 months without a visa. And I can report to you that we were very happy to see our two countries launching a mobility or demobility working group, which should specifically help our two governments to explore how we can make sure that our people can freely travel from one country to another. And yes, and as you so rightly said, we have started our visa-free regime with the European Union, with the Schengen countries. It has been working extremely well. And this is our goal. We should make sure that we can benefit from this free exchange of people, ideas. It's good for business. And between our two countries, I'm absolutely sure this is the right way to move forward.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I hope we could do that as quickly as possible. I do see the chairs putting up the 30 seconds. Just you brought up NATO. So what's been Russia's reaction to NATO's support and involvement in the reforms in Ukraine? If you could just quickly, in 30 seconds, let us know.
they are trying to split the NATO countries on this issue. And that's why we need countries like Canada to be very vocal. And we would like Canada to talk more to your partners across the NATO to make sure that they know what you know about Ukraine.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Fonseca. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur. Monsieur Bergeron, bon.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Mr. Bergeron, good afternoon. You have 6 minutes now. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Hello, Your Excellency. I also would like to welcome the people who are there with you, and I also want to thank my colleagues on the Foreign Affairs Committee and also on the Defense Committee who are here as observers. So very quickly, Your Excellency, we know that Russia announced a withdrawal of its troops that were supposed to be going back to their homes next May, or May 1st, last May 1st. But it seems that recent indications show us that the troops are still massed at the Ukrainian border, or at least they're still, they have a lot of equipment there in place. What explains this difference between the announcing of the withdrawal of the troops and the actual facts, which the troops are still at the borders of Ukraine? And also, there's a fair bit of material at the Ukrainian border.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much for this question, this important question.
I would like to refer you to some of the visuals that that we shared with the members of the committee. So you might want to look at the first slides. They give you some data with numbers, what we have along the Ukrainian border. So what exactly is happening? Most the mass military movement of equipment to the border of Ukraine happened in March and April, and there was only partial troop withdrawal. The vast majority of the equipment still remains in positions, and in preparation for Zapad 2021, this major drill, Russians have created logistics bases in Belarus, and some Western military analysts, they believe that these bases will become permanent. That did not happen in previous Zapad exercises. So this leaves us with this very clear understanding that it's a very new context, new situation, and that's why we should take it very seriously.
And what would explain, in your view, according to the information, the intelligence information that have reached you, what would explain this massing of troops and material at the border? Is it looking at is it because Ukraine might join NATO soon, or is it signs of a new offensive on Donbass, for example?
We can assume that the Russians have considered several military options. First, they gathered this massive amount of force around the city of Voronezh with a direct threat for our major city of Kharkiv. Second, there is this vulnerable direction towards the city of Mariupol along the Azov Sea. And the Russians have been dreaming for quite a long time of creating this land bridge from the Russia mainland to the occupied Crimea. Finally, there are plenty of options with expansion of the occupation zone into wider Donbass. And there can be a lot of possible reasons why the Russians want to try to do that, and we can explore it further. But one way or another, they are testing our reaction. They have been testing the reaction of the West, and I think they badly miscalculated the response.
In that very tense context of the situation with Russia, we know that President Zelensky presented the idea of a platform for reintegrating some territories into Ukraine, and was hoping that this platform be launched in August 2021, so that this would coincide with the 30th anniversary of Ukrainian independence. Do you believe that this platform has any chance of being at all successful, giving this seemingly aggressive desires of Russia that's being manifested currently?
Yes. And what Monsieur Bergeron refers to is the Crimean platform, which should be presented in August later this year. And it should be a club of like-minded countries which will work together to make sure that we can restore territorial integrity of Ukraine. And I can give you one historical example. It's what happened to the Baltic nations. The West never recognized the occupation of the Baltic nations by the Soviet Union, by Russia, and eventually that approach proved to be the right one. So for Canada to join the Crimean platform is to be on the right side of history, especially you are already in the position when you strongly support Ukraine in that specific matter.
Vous parlez des nations de...
You're talking about countries of goodwill. We know that Ukraine, Russia, France, and Germany are negotiating currently in order to try and solve the problem. But we know that President Zelensky expressed the wish that the US, the UK, and Canada join those initiatives trying to reach a peace accord. Do you think that Russia would accept having the US, UK, and Canada join this effort?
I believe this would be very right thing to do, because Canada has a very unique knowledge of the situation in Ukraine, and secondly, because of this extraordinary reputation that Canada has in the international community. We would be very glad to see Canada as a major participant of the peace process.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Bergeron.
Thank you very much.
We now go to our final questioner in this first round, and that's Mr. Harris for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ambassador Savchenko, and the other representatives from the embassy. Welcome to our committee. I note from our briefing that we received from the analysts that Canada's contribution to the Ukraine since 2014 in terms of military support, the training of 25,000 military personnel, and another 2,500 in relation to the under the military training and cooperation program, and plus a significant amount of financial support as well. The friendship between Ukraine and Canada has been noted with 1 million, more than 1 million Ukrainian Canadians. Have you received similar support from other countries as well as Canada?
Yes, we have some other partners who help us, but I think it would be fair to say that Canada is in a very special position because of the amount of your support and because of the decisions which were made and the areas which were picked by Canada to help us in.
Well, I'm glad that is appreciated, and I know many Canadians have a affection for Ukraine and Ukrainian people. I wanted to ask and follow up on Mr. Bergeron's question about the Crimean platform, which you mentioned, and as well as I'm reading about the announcement back in March of support by President Zelensky of the Ukraine National Security Defense Council calling for diplomatic, military, economic, and other actions to allow Ukraine to recover and reintegrate the Crimean territory. And that seems to be tied to some extent to the Crimean platform. Is there any relationship between these announcements and the Russian buildup that took place in March and April of this year, or is these just totally independent actions?
Yes and no. Of course, the Russian military up is a very natural reason for us to increase our efforts in all directions. And no, in the sense because this should have been we should have done this much earlier. Crimea is not covered by the Normandy process, and in many senses, Russia is trying to turn Crimea in a tribal land when it comes to human rights situation, to the persecution of the Crimean Tatars, to all the other terrible things which are happening. There are not too many ways, too many things that can be done if we don't change anything. So with the Crimean platform, it's about very practical steps that we can cooperate on. It's about how we can coordinate our sanctions policy. It's how we can monitor the human rights situation. It's how we can discuss the security options. And this is how we can get the situation back on the right track.
Do you have concerns that the international community solidarity with respect to non-recognition of Crimea as part of Russia is not strong, or because Canada is certainly fully committed to not ever recognizing that and continuing with sanctions against Russia? Is that a concern of yours, or is this something that you feel is strong and will not waver?
We are quite confident about this support. And actually, Canada has been one of the true leaders of this international coalition. We feel that this non-recognition approach has been followed by the vast majority of the countries of the free world. This is the right way to move forward. Our concern is how we can monetize this consensus into very practical steps that we can do together.
And in the case of Canada, or in the case of your Crimea plan, the Crimea platform, what would you hope that Canada would do if it were to participate in that plan?
First, we hope that Canada will be represented appropriately at this inaugural summit in August of 2021. There will also be a parliamentary segment or parliamentary dimension of this initiative. And I think in the months that we have left before the event, we should explore how we can get Canadian parliamentarians involved. And there are some certain areas where Canada is a true leader in this coalition. One of them is the sanctions policy. Second is the human rights issues. Canada has been known for its very strong position in support for the Crimean Tatars and so on. So we want Canada to have a very strong voice in that coalition. I am absolutely sure that it will be much appreciated and it will be a huge impact.
When you talk in the plan of the military plan, that diplomatic, military, and economic actions that Ukraine could take to reintegrate Crimea, can you give an example of the kind of military actions, or are we talking about a military plan?
I think our obvious priority is to find a diplomatic and political solution to the situation, and that refers both to the occupied Crimea and to the occupied territories of Donbass.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Harris. Thank you, Ambassador. We'll now go to round two, and welcome, Mr. Bazan. You've got the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I wanted to say greetings to Ambassador Shevchenko. It's great to see you at committee here, and appreciate your presentation and the information that you circulated ahead of your appearance. I wanted to drill down a little bit into Operation Unifier. I know one of the concerns that we've had for some time was the personal safety of Ukraine, of Canadian troops to being exposed to COVID-19. I know that Ukraine is suffering a fairly big impact by the pandemic. I know that about 75% of Canadian members of the armed forces have already received their first and second doses of vaccine. I'm wondering how the health is of Ukrainian troops because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and whether or not that's impacting on the training mission of Operation Unifier, not just by Canada, but also we know the Americans and the Brits are also helping train Ukrainian troops.
Well, even as we speak, there are about 200 Canadians who train Ukrainian soldiers and officers, and I do not have enough words to express you how grateful we are for that support. Even under these very difficult circumstances, Canada managed to continue Unifier. So we did have to adjust some training plans, but overall, we could see Unifier continuing doing its very important mission. As of the moment, there are more than 20,000 of Ukrainian soldiers and officers who have gone through the training. For obvious reason, COVID does not stop the war from happening, and we need your support every day. And Mr. Brazan, I would use this opportunity to say that I think together we should explore some options how we can improve Unifier in the future after 2022. And one of the ways to improve it is to think how we can go from platoon to brigade level. We can think what geographical decisions we should make, and there is a lot of joint common interest in further use of Shiroki Land Training Center in the south of Ukraine, and some other things to do. But overall, it's a major success. It's a two-way learning street, and we greatly appreciate it.
And so you took my second question, which was what can we do to actually expand the role, and I want to find out what that would entail, and also making the mission more long term, because right now it's on an annual renewal and it seems to always get renewed at the last minute, which brings about some anxiety and unnecessary stress, in my opinion. So how does Operation Unifier with Canadian Armed Forces compare to that of what the Americans are doing with Ukrainian troops?
I think our men and women in uniforms have created very special spirit of camaraderie, and that is not just in the training centers or at the Invictus Games. It's overall. And I had the pleasure of meeting Sarah here, who was the recent Unifier commander, and she told me the story how it's at a gas station in Ukraine, someone saw this Canadian chevron on their uniforms, and people just rushed to them trying to hug them because that's the way people wanted to show what we feel about Canada and Canadian support. To be more serious about this, I think we have traveled a very impressive distance from the launch of Unifier to this day, and the level of trust is fantastic, incredible. I think now we understand so much better how we can make the most use out of this cooperation. And we hope to see Unifier troops under the Canadian flags during the Independence Day parade in downtown Kyiv on the Independence Day parade in August.
I appreciate that, Ambassador. But what I'm trying to get at is, I know that there's other countries that are there helping train Ukrainian forces as well. And I know we're talking about changing Operation Unifier going forward. So what is other countries, nations doing, such as the Americans, such as the British, and I think the Aussies are there, the Poles are helping. So just, are we seeing changes in their training missions as well compared to what they've done in the past?
If it's okay, I'll invite Colonel Siromacha to step in for a short moment.
Good afternoon, dear friends. My name is Colonel Siromacha. As a military guy, I ask you, do you read me loud and clear?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So, Unifier, that's our best achievement. And I would say, comparing to Orbital, UK mission in Ukraine, and GMTGU of US guys, Unifier has its exact capacity to bring to Ukrainian Armed Forces exactly what we need. For instance, just recently on April 14, we had a great session between Deputy Minister of Political Issues, Mr. Peter Hammerschmidt, and Deputy Minister of Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, General retired Petrenko, on strategic dialogue. It's Paul Mill consultations regarding not only Unifier issues, but helping Ukraine to come to NATO. For instance, we have extremely good presence of Canadians in Ukraine, Canadian Armed Forces men and women in uniform. And what we are doing, they are training our soldiers on the multiple levels. Let's say if you started the Unifier in 2015 as a platoon level training, now that's already brigade level training. I would say that's extremely great achievement for us. And we are training not only units, but we're training professionals. For instance, in our training center in Desna, Canadian snipers train Ukrainian snipers. And at the same time, they get their professional experience and knowledge from the combat zone. Then we are talking about not only training of officers or soldiers, but we are talking about cadets. For instance, now we are working on a future kind of future training of Ukrainian cadets on Canadian combat ships when they come to the Black Sea. We're working now in close cooperation with the NATO Policy Department of DND, and we are working on these issues in order to understand how we get proper clearance to bring these cadets on board.
Colonel Siromakos, I apologize. In the interest of time, let me pause you there. There'll be lots of time to revert to this point in subsequent sessions. Just in the interest of making sure that everybody gets their round, I will have to pause you for the moment and give the floor to Mr. Baker. Please go ahead, Mr. Baker. The floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Chair, and Ambassador Shevchenko, Colonel Siromakha, Mr. Yashchenko, thank you for being here. And I wanted to thank the members and the chairs of both the Foreign Affairs Committee and the Committee on National Defense for organizing this meeting today. I think this is incredibly productive and useful and important. I'm also wanted to say that as chair of the Canada-Ukraine Parliamentary Friendship Group, I see a lot of members of the Friendship Group and its executive here today. This is a group of this is an all-party committee of MPs from all four parties in the House of Commons who support Ukraine and want to discover ways and work together to find ways for Canada and Ukraine to work more closely together. And I'm proud to see so many of them here today. And I thank them all for their engagement and the other MPs who aren't here today. So thank you for that. Ambassador, I've had the privilege of traveling to Ukraine on a number of occasions. And one of the most memorable moments was as an election observer in the last presidential elections, and I was posted to Eastern Ukraine, in fact, to Mariupol and to election districts along the contact line where the conflict is taking place. So I had an opportunity to meet villagers and election polling stations in that region. And there were the people I met didn't know I was involved in politics or in government at all, but many of them, when they found out that I was Canadian, because they saw a badge on my chest that had a maple leaf on it, they would come up to me and they would say, "Thank you for all that Canada is doing." And I share this story with you to say two things. One is many times we hear from the Russian government, from other propaganda sources, that the people in Eastern Ukraine want to be part of Russia. And having met those people in Eastern Ukraine, I know that nothing is further from the truth. But I also share this because I think it's a sign to all of us who are members of Parliament, who are here today, that the impact that Canada is having is profound, and that we need to continue our work. So, Ambassador, my first question to you is, you spoke about NATO integration and the importance of NATO integration for Ukraine. What measures can Canada take to help Ukraine realize its ambition to join NATO?
Well, if I may, I would like to refer all of you to the slide in the presentation under, one moment, it is slide number 44. And it has an exact quote from the Bucharest 2008 decision on Ukraine and on Georgia. And this direct quote from the summit decision says that membership action plan is the next step for Ukraine and Georgia on their direct way to membership. And the summit actually asked foreign minister to make a first assessment of progress at their December 2008 meeting. So the foreign ministers were meant to decide on the membership action plan applications for Ukraine and Georgia. 13 years later, we still have not seen any progress on that. And I can tell you that probably if we saw that swift action in 2008, we would not have seen the Russian aggression into Georgia and into Ukraine. So that can be an argument to those who say that we should not probably provoke Russia with any decisions on NATO. It actually works the other way around. So this time, we want to see a very good and genuine conversation about the future cooperation between Ukraine and NATO. And I think we should recognize that Canada is in a very special position for that specific conversation.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ambassador, what are the implications of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline for our security, for the security of our allies, and for Ukraine's security, and what role should Canada play on this issue?
when we talk about oil and gas and about Russia, we know that it's never just about oil and gas. It's a security issue, and it's a geopolitical issue. That's the way President Putin and the Kremlin sees that. And Nord Stream 2 is the Russian way to make their influence in Europe concrete and seal it for decades to come. So to make the long story short, I think that if Canada is serious about the security situation in Europe, and if Canada is serious about the future of the energy market, of the global energy market, Canada should pay a very precise attention to the future of Nord Stream 2. We believe that this project should be stopped and can be stopped.
Thank you, Ambassador. I wanted to follow up on something that Mr. Fonseca was asking about in his questions. And I know I only have about a minute left. He spoke to the fact that Canada has imposed a range of sanctions on a number of individuals who have been involved in the invasion of Eastern Ukraine, who've been involved in the annexation of Crimea. You spoke to the fact that sanctions are necessary. You mentioned Magnitsky, you mentioned SWIFT, you talked about Russia's sovereign debt. Could you talk about what is SWIFT and what do you mean when you refer to that for the members of this committee who may not be familiar?
And just a brief answer, Mr. Ambassador, please.
We just feel that the Russian economy and the Russian oligarchs and the Putin's closest allies heavily depend on their financial assets and on their access to the Western financial system. That tells us we should target that.
Merci beaucoup. Monsieur Bergeron, pour 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bergeron. 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to continue the discussion that we had, His Excellency, the Ambassador, and I earlier, to understand Ukraine's motivations in terms of the Crimean platform. We understand that. We also understand why Ukraine would want to have the US, the UK, and Canada join France, Russia, Germany, and Ukraine for the peace negotiations. And you also expressed clearly why Canada would have its place, its role to play in that context. But the question that still remains to be asked is, do you believe that Russia would be positive about the arrival of the US, the UK, and Canada in this group of countries who are examining what can be done for the future?
We're not going to have an answer to that until we try. And I think the situation makes us to be creative and inventive, and we need to try different options. And when it comes to Canada, I can just tell you that last year Ukraine adopted its new national national security strategy, and Canada was identified as one of the 5 countries of strategic importance for Ukraine, along with the US, UK, France, and Germany. That reflects what we in our part of the world think and feel about Canada.
C'est assurément le reflet.
That is surely a reflection of what you think, but I doubt that that would be a reflection of what the Russians believe. So I'd like to bring you back to the document that you sent us. You have various slides on the massing up of Russian troops, deploying ships coming from the Caspian Sea fleet, and you're talking about Espini. Is this finished? Is this over? And what's your answer to this question? Is it over?
Over?
En fait, c'est vous-même qui posez la question dans votre...
Well, actually, you're asking this in your question after the pages describing the Russian troop deployment. You're asking, is this finished? So I would like to ask you to answer this. In your opinion, is it finished?
Not at all. And actually, just recently, I've seen this CBC story from the city of Voronezh, where the CBC correspondent actually had a chance to see the Russian deployment, which is stationed right next to Voronezh in very close proximity from the Ukrainian border. So the short answer is no, it's far from over, and the Russians are still exploring their options what to do with these deployments.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Monsieur Bergeron.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Bergeron.
Next 2.5 minutes, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to just further explore the NATO question that was arisen. Part of the accession to NATO, of course, is the membership action plan that was mentioned that hasn't happened yet, but is also NATO being a political and economic alliance, looks at questions of economic and political reform as part of this process. And I note that it was mentioned by Secretary of State Blinken on a recent visit to Ukraine. Can you tell us what progress has been made in terms of economic and political reform since 2014, when part of this process started?
Ukraine is going through this very difficult process of modernizing the country, and Canada is a major part of that. And actually, your deep involvement into the Ukrainian reforms is part of the reason why we feel that Canadian voice should be very strong and vocal in the discussions about the future of Ukraine and NATO. Because you know so well what is happening in Ukraine, because of your heavy involvement in our national police reforms, in the decentralization reforms, in anti-corruption reforms. So we see it all as interconnected parts of the same decision.
Could you give us some examples of the results that have been achieved by these reforms that have been implemented?
Absolutely. If you look at the national police with very high level of trust, it's it's strikingly different from what it used to be when the police was seen as a threat by citizens. Then we see this world-class public procurement system, which is called Prozoro, and it's an award-winning software which helps us to fight corruption. So all of that has happened because of two reasons. First, it's very strong civil society in Ukraine, and second, it's very committed Western support of all these changes. We appreciate them a lot.
Thank you very much. I don't know. I think I have 30 seconds left, so I don't know if I could get a question and an answer in this time. The MAP, the Membership Action Plan itself, would take a long time, would it not? Or can often do so. So it doesn't seem that this would be a sudden step, even if the Membership Action Plan was started right away. Is that correct?
That's not the way we see it. And when Poland and our Baltic brothers and sisters started their conversation with NATO about entering NATO, many people thought it would be a very long story. Actually, it wasn't. So I think we're in a position to start moving forward, and we hope to do so.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harris. Thank you, Ambassador. We will now go to Mr. Diot for 5 minutes, please.
Mr. Ambassador, it's really good to see you. It's unfortunate that with COVID, we can't be in person, but, you know, hopefully soon, all of that good stuff. I know Yvonne was talking about having gone and observed the election. I did the same, and it really was one of the highlights of my career, especially seeing how Ukrainians really cherish democracy. And I think there's a real lesson for Canadians, I think, in that whole thing. As you know, we were both journalists, and you were probably more famous than I ever was. And you actually worked very hard on the movement against censorship. And, you know, we're kind of working right now as the official opposition against C-10, which is kind of a censorship bill. That's neither here nor there. But why is it that the world is not hearing more about what's going on at the border with Russia? It just seems like the media is just not there. What can be done? What's happening?
Well, Mr. Diot, I think if we try to put a short list of big, huge problems that the world faces right now, it might be not such a short list. So I think we can understand that. And also, we should not neglect the fact that Russia has been working for many years, trying to create myth and trying to split the West. and its propaganda machine has never stopped working. And during this major escalation, we also saw that this propaganda machine worked full steam. First, they tried to present Ukraine as a country which was about to attack Russia. Second, we saw this narrative that it wasn't actually Ukraine trying to attack Russia, but it was NATO, including the US and Canada, who were preparing this assault against Russia. So we should think about all these propaganda issues when we talk about hybrid wars and about this complicated world.
So, like, what can we do about it? Because it's true, censorship and propaganda. It's a real issue. If you ask the average Canadian what's going on in Ukraine, there is not a story there. Unfortunately, we know because we are parliamentarians, and so how do we get the word out? Like how do you deal with the disinformation, with the Russians spinning their tales? Where do we go? Like what can we do?
Mr. Dewatt, I'll just say that we appreciate a lot the support we already get from Canada across the party lines and from the wide public. But I would say that with its knowledge, with its expertise and the resources that Canada has invested into Ukraine, your country should be a very strong voice in a conversation about Ukraine and the wider Europe, and specifically about NATO's deterrence to Russia and about NATO's partnership with Ukraine. We want people like Unifier commanders speaking in Brussels about the benefits and challenges of having Ukraine in NATO. And I can only encourage all of you to raise your voice on this issue.
So just on that, I know others have touched on this subject, but what should Canada be doing in your view? What more can we do? Because we are a strong ally of yours, obviously. I know that you know that I've got many Ukrainian Canadians in my riding. What more can we do? I think it's a very popular. I think Ukraine is a very popular thing in the public context. We want to build a democracy. We want to help you, and we don't want to see bad things happen with Russians. What more should we be doing?
You can find some of these steps that we suggest in the final slides of the presentation that was circulated among you. But I can just mention that renewal of Unifier 2022 is very important. Sanctions against Russia with all different avenues are very important. We have discussed NATO. And also we want Canada to use its reputation and its status in the international organization to work with other countries to consolidate this coalition in support of Ukraine, whether it's OSCE, whether it's platforms like G7 or NATO. We hope your voice will be very strong and vocal.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Dewatt. Thank you, Ambassador. We will now go to the final questioner in this round, and that's Dr. Fry for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for coming and spending this length of time with us. I was really very glad that you mentioned what Russia's overall militarization of the Arctic, the threat to Baltic nations, and even I wondered what you think about its now being a protector within Armenia. It would seem to me that Russia is trying to regain the old USSR and become a power broker in that way. So I wanted to know what you thought of Russia having gained incursion into Armenia, saying they're peacemakers there. The other question that I wanted to ask you is that you talked about bringing together like-minded nations. However, Russia has got a whip that it holds over a lot of nations in Europe, and that's oil and its ability to give them energy. And that prevents a lot of them from probably being as aggressive as they could. And so, you know, I just wondered if you wanted to tell us what you think the end game here for Russia is, and whether Canada should be speaking up about the militarization of the Arctic, because we are an Arctic nation. And I just wanted to finally, and I'll let you answer, but I wanted to say one thing. I have been to Ukraine many times because I am with the OSCE-PA. And I can tell you, I have seen no more beautiful city than your city of Kiev. It's the most beautiful city in the world. And I just wanted to say that for me, the issue of what Canada is doing in Ukraine goes beyond sanctions, etc. It's about helping to form a police force that believes in democracy and in protection of peoples. It's about training the military. It's about working with gender equality and LGBT equality across Ukraine. I was there when you had just come out from being on the Pride Parade, your chief of police of Kyiv. So I just wanted to congratulate you on the steps you have made, but to also ask you if you could give me the end game for Russia and how we can get like-minded nations to come on board to support you for NATO when they have this sword over their heads about energy and oil.
Those are some very good questions. I'll start from the end. I think, well, there are many schools of thought on that, but I believe that Putin is not, in many ways, is not the source of the problems we see. In many ways, he is a reflection of the Russian political class agenda, and he is a reflection of the state of the Russian society, which means we'll probably have to deal with this aggressive politics and policy for many years, maybe for decades. And that is why we should take this very strategically and very seriously. And that's exactly why we should think thoroughly all the situation with Nord Stream 2. And you're absolutely rightly pointed that oil has always been and will be used as a way to influence some nations, including those nations in the Europe that you mentioned. Finally, with Armenia and with Azerbaijan, we are watching closely the situation. I can tell you one thing. When you see Russian peacekeepers in the region, that's usually not a sign that peace is closer. Usually it's a concern when you see Russian troops around. So that's something which makes us follow the situation with a lot of concern.
Thank you so much.
You still have about a minute and a half, Dr. Fry.
That's fine.
You're good? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ambassador. We'll then go into round three. Ms. Galland, welcome to the committee. The floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And during the winter of 2014, a forum Mr. Ambassador Shevchenko would be very familiar with, the NATO Parliamentary Assembly was the Afghanistan conflict was winding down. In fact, late in the afternoon, we were being told about the peace dividends we were about to enjoy. Well, the next morning, we woke up to reports of little green men having invaded Crimea. But unlike the Middle East conflict, the asymmetric warfare we were now seeing was being conducted by a state actor. Now, since the pandemic hit, we haven't been able to gather, and I'm really interested in knowing what new types of hybrid warfare or the trends that you're seeing in Ukraine since the pandemic hit.
Well, we have seen a lot of activities, hostile activities, and trying to use the pandemic situation in terms of propaganda and information wars. And there is one country which tries to make sure that to explain that all the vaccines are bad except for the Sputnik, and there are some other ways how this country is trying to undermine our government's activities to fight the pandemic. But also, I think on a broader scale, these several last months, they disclosed many other things. One of them is the situation with the explosion in the Czech Republic, with clear signs of Russia intelligence operations behind that. And that actually has contributed into this major change of context in the Eastern Europe. So overall, I'll say that we are witnessing more and more new ways how this one country is trying to challenge the free world and the international order and this is a good reason for us to coordinate.
With the migration from the workplace and school to home, what, if any, new or unique cyber aggressions have Ukrainians been experiencing?
Well, it's our everyday routine to fight the cyber attacks from the aggressor, and we are following very closely the developments in other countries, including those in the West, and obviously the situation with the colonial pipeline was very alarming. That is another reason for us to work harder on our intel exchange and closer cooperation between our armed forces and our security organizations.
And in what ways has Putin used artificial intelligence to sophisticate Russia's use of hybrid warfare?
If the chair allows, I'll probably pass the floor to Colonel Siromacho on this.
Of course.
Thank you, sir. Not sure, however, you've seen the parade on May 9 in Moscow, because Russians will demonstrated first time in their history robot platform Uran 9. That's a combat platform with robot, and this robot uses artificial intelligence. So they are not only using artificial intelligence in peaceful means, for instance, like International Space Station, we use robot with artificial intelligence. His name is Fedor. It doesn't work properly, but they use these platforms on wheels, and they demonstrated in Moscow, downtown Moscow, on May 9. That's a victory day. They are showing the achievements of their science. And if I may just come back to trends we've been discussing just a few minutes ago, let me bring you one example how Russians are using opportunities. For instance, all of you you remember this situation in Suez Canal. Then a merchant ship has blocked the canal for a few days, and it's actually created chaos within world logistics support. And Russians now started thinking about how to use northern route instead of Suez Canal, because if ships from Asia come to Europe, it takes 14 days less to come to Western Europe ports. And I would like to tell you that Russians, they already established Arctic Command in 2014. So we have already 13 new military airfields and 16 deep water ports in the Arctic. So I would say, if we are talking about trends, that's definitely climate.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Colonel Siromacho, and thank you, Ms. Gallant. We will now go to Mr. Baker for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Ambassador, I think Mr. Diot was speaking to the fact that many Canadians have connections to Ukraine through family and friends and business, et cetera. But I think there's other reasons that Canada supports Ukraine. Could you explain for those viewers out there who are watching, for people who are watching, for Canadians who are watching, why it's important that Canada support Ukraine in defending its security and its territorial integrity?
Well, indeed, we believe that Canada is so supportive of Ukraine, not just because of this wonderful Ukrainian-Canadian community, but also because Canada believes that it's in its long-term interest to have a stable, democratic country as Ukraine is struggling to be. And also, I think many people in Canada realize that today Ukraine is fighting on behalf of the whole free world. We feel that we are de facto eastern flank of NATO. And Mr. Baker, I'll just use this again to reinforce that if there is one region on the planet where Canada is making a huge difference, is already making a huge difference, right now it's Eastern Europe and specifically Ukraine. Because of this very much appreciated Canadian military deployment in Ukraine, because of this very unique cultural connection that Canada has throughout Ukraine and the region, because of the massive footprint in the field of international assistance. And in the case of Ukraine, it's Canada's very deep involvement in reforming the armed forces, the national police, the intelligence community, you name it. So if you're looking for one place on the planet where Canada can make a huge difference, huge impact, I will start with Ukraine.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ambassador, one of the areas where Canada has made a significant contribution to help Ukraine reform is in rule of law, in the reform of its judiciary. I think many people believe that if Ukraine's going to attract the foreign investment it needs to strengthen its economy, to offer prosperity to Ukrainians that they hope for, and to secure its sovereignty, rule of law has to be reinforced and corruption has to be eliminated. And I know that some Canadian businesses who have invested in Ukraine have struggled with this. Can you speak to the steps that Ukraine is taking to address corruption and to attract foreign investment, like those investments that have been made by those Canadian investors?
Reform of the judiciary is of paramount importance, and fortunately, we do not have too many warring situations, but I think even one is one more than we should have. So I think it's very clear that we do want to make sure that Canadian investors, they experience rule of law and fair judicial decisions. That is our goal. And also we want to make sure that Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement is utilized full scale. And that is another reason why we want to expand Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement into services and investments. Our intention is to make sure that in Ukraine we have very friendly space, very comfortable space for Canadian businesses to operate, and we have very strong pragmatic reasons for that. It's not just about creating jobs, but it's about exchange of best practices, of good technologies, and this is how we can strongly benefit, both nations, how we can strongly benefit of this.
Yeah, it's absolutely a win-win, and there's a lot of opportunity there. I agree completely with you, Ambassador. And I thank you for the work that Ukraine's doing to undertake those reforms. I think those are very important. Government, many members on both sides of the aisle here have spoken to some of the steps that Canada has taken over the years to be supportive of Ukraine, whether that's through sanctions, whether that's the steps that have been taken to support Ukraine's integration into NATO, whether that be the Unifier mission. Canada's invested $800 million in assistance to Ukraine since 2015, if I'm not mistaken, to support Ukraine's reform efforts, and of course, repeated statements in support of Ukraine at the G7 and internationally that Ukraine's sovereignty is unwavering. I see the 30-second warning, and 30 seconds or less, Ambassador. What has been the impact of these measures, and what more can Canada do?
Just when you see Ukraine succeeding in modernizing the country, you should be aware that that is happening because of strong support that we are getting from countries like Canada. And if Canada is serious about advancing its values, its approach to the international order and to domestic things, Ukraine is the right country to apply that effort.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Baker.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Baker. Thank you, Ambassador. And now Mr. Bergeron has 2.5 minutes. So I thought we were on our second turn. It's the same allocation of time for the second, third, and fourth turns. All right. So a few moments ago, Colonel Sumata talked about supply routes in the Arctic. In the document you gave us, I found there was a lot of emphasis on the Arctic situation, and I wondered if we wanted to draw a parallel between the fact that troops are building up at the borders of Ukraine and also that there's a military buildup at the Canadian border via the Arctic. But I believe that Colonel Simi was giving us good indications that this is a true concern. So maybe Colonel Siromacha would continue with what he was telling us a few minutes ago when Dr. Fry asked him about the Arctic, of the fact that the Arctic's very important and wanting to know what Russia's doing there.
Merci beaucoup pour votre question.
Thank you for your question. I wanted to say that the Arctic is the new theater for Russia because now on the border there are more than 90,000 troops in European borders. But in the Arctic there's a Russian fleet. And in terms of the Ukraine, there were about 54 battalions, combat battalions. In April 2019, the Russians sent their entire northern fleet to the Arctic.
Say, simultaneously, we've built up on the frontier with Ukraine. We saw huge development in Arctic. For instance, on the presentation, you see a nice picture with 3 submarines, Russian submarines on the northern pole. I would say that's a brilliant indication how Russians, they've just shown their capacity and their importance of their nuclear assets in the region. For instance, on 19 April, they've sent all their fleet assets from their bases, respective bases, to the respective areas in Arctic Ocean. And I would say the brilliant explanation what is going on in Arctic, that's article that Markus Kolgas has published recently in his article. His name is "Winter is Coming to Canada's North." Maclean's Magazines has published this article recently, and I would say that Mr. Kolga is now explaining why Russia has started all these activities in the north with a kind of assessment that Foreign Minister Lavrov recently announced that all the oil and gas and minerals under the ice, that's now will be, let's say, property of Russia. And definitely 200 nautical miles, that's exclusive zone of Canada. But Russia's ambitions are at the edge of this zone.
So, Mark, I apologize. We'll have to leave it there. Monsieur Bergeron, vous aurez une...
Mr. Bergeron, you'll get a final turn in the 4th round of questions.
To Mr. Harris for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of questions for the ambassador in relation to the President Zelensky has recently indicated some concern with the current Minsk agreement and would like to see some changes made. Could you indicate what concerns there are and what changes President Zelensky would like to make in that agreement?
The Minsk agreement helped us to slow down the major escalation which we witnessed in 2014 and 2015, but it never laid down a clear way how we can move forward. And it's well known that it's our view that we should start with the ceasefire and with the de-escalation along the front line, and then proceed towards the political settlement and towards and eventually to the election in the occupied territories. Now, again, the Russians try to present this differently. They would like to have an election first. It's very difficult to understand how you can have an election when there is no ceasefire. So in a way, I'm telling you this just to explain that the Minsk agreements and the Minsk process has never actually laid down a clear way how we can get to the successful result in this process. The second strong argument to review Minsk agreements is to remind ourselves that Crimea is not covered by the Normandy process and by the Minsk agreement. So one way or another, we should be open to some other options for peace talks. Having said that, Ukraine is strongly committed to the existing Minsk agreements.
So yes, the note provided to us indicated that there was meetings even as late as April of this year, during which both Ukraine and Russia offered their support and undertook to implement the provisions of that agreement. So you're looking for additional measures as well. What specific ones would you want to see?
And just a brief answer, Ambassador, please.
Paragraph number 1 is strong and reliable and sustainable ceasefire. That has never happened. We could start with that.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Harris. Thank you, Ambassador. Mr. Bazan, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ambassador, you're talking earlier about things that Ukraine need, which includes defensive weapons. What specific defensive weapons does Ukraine want from Canada and other allies?
And Mr. Chairman, if you allow, I would invite Colonel Sirmaha to start on that.
Of course, please. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much for the question. So since 2014, Ukraine has already received a lot from Canada, and it was timely and accurate, exact assistance we've been waiting for, desperately waiting for. Now, situation is completely changed. So we have already strong armed forces, and what we face now, that's competition of intelligence and competition of modern, sophisticated assets. For instance, on the border with Russia and within Ukrainian territory, we have Russian modern electronic warfare equipment. So modern and so powerful and successful that they even jammed US drone Global Hawk in end of April this year, 4th at 12. This drone has been jammed by let's say unidentified assets within territory of Ukraine, but I would rather say that it was Russian electronic warfare asset, either Krasuha 4 or something like this. So what?
And there's also reports of electronic warfare and in the Black Sea of U.S. destroyers being destabilized by Russian assets in the region.
Absolutely, yes, because the U.S. ship has been overflown by Russian, not very young aircraft Su-24. I would say 25 years old, maybe even plus. But the electronic warfare assets on board of this aircraft were quite powerful. So that's why if we're talking about what Canada can do more, that's to help us with our ability to counteract Russian electronic warfare measures, how to better protect very sensitive areas in the Sea of Azov and the northern part of Black Sea as well. In the same time, on tactical level, we face severe casualties against snipers because Russian sniper teams were permanently deployed along the contact line. And that's not only Russian armed forces snipers, that's Russian special forces snipers, that's GRU snipers, that's FSB snipers, and that's like a tour of duty for them to go to the contact line and to work against our positions, our soldiers, our officers, men and women in uniform. And I can tell you, as a military guy, I can think evil in a Friday night, but to start competition who will hit Ukrainian soldier in the eye, I would say that's not very friendly approach from our neighbors. So what do we need, for instance, in this particular case? That's collimator sights, night vision devices, thermal scope, laser designators, and we have some lists and we are sharing this list of requirements with our colleagues here in Department of National Defense. And I know that there are some plans to provide Ukraine with partially, let's say, with some non-lethal assistance in the next period of time. And DND knows about these plans and they are working on this. In the same time, if we are speaking about real good Canadian assistance to Ukraine, I would slightly move towards political support. For instance, you definitely know about our plans to work on NATO-Ukrainian Commission, and we definitely need Canadian support to unblock this commission because of the position of some member states. As Ambassador said before, we are working on enhanced security agreement between Ukraine and NATO, because we need to start exchange of restricted information via secure channels. Thank you.
Okay.
Warning.
Yeah, thanks, Colonel. I'm going to have to cut you off because I see the 30 seconds come up. I just want to say this to both Ambassador Shevchenko and to you, Colonel Soromoka, that you mentioned that there was Ukrainian forces are holding the eastern flank to NATO, and I want to thank all those that have stood on the line. You are the front line against Russian aggression and the rest of Europe and all of NATO for that matter. And I know that you paid a terrible price in lives lost and displaced people. And in all the ongoing injuries, both visible and invisible, have been suffered by Ukrainian forces. So I just want to pass on my gratitude and condolences to those that were lost and to the families that were victimized. And just know that we will continue as conservatives stand with Ukraine, stand united with Ukraine, and ensure that some of the things that you had that are no longer being provided, like radar sat imagery, is something that we'd love to restore and work with you in providing the defensive weapons that you require.
Thank you, Mr. Bazan, and we'll pass it and take it as a message on behalf of all of Canada. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Bazan. Thank you, Ambassador. We'll now go to Mr. Fonseca for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair and Ambassador Colonel. I'm glad that I'm sure you're glad that having seen kind of the Biden administration return to supporting a liberal rules-based order, the UN, WTO, other multilateral organizations that maybe the U.S. had gotten away from for a while. Also, I want to bring up in terms of how we've all been affected, be it Europe, United States, Canada, by some of these Russian aggressions. We've seen the poisoning in Russia of Alexei Navalny and imprisonment. We saw what happened in Belarus with Ryanair. We see the elections interference in the United States and in other places around the world. We saw the United States energy systems being attacked, not necessarily, I'm not sure, by the state of Russia, but by Russians that are attacking these states. So why I say that is through these targeted Russian political interference, disinformation campaigns, cyber incursions, should we exchange lessons learned from others, from yourselves, from everybody, getting together with our respective experiences and share best practices to combat these and other forms of Russian hybrid warfare? I really feel this is where Russia is attacking the world, through this hybrid warfare, attacking our economic systems, our energy systems, defense systems, and bigger than all of that, our democracy, by interfering with our elections. I would like to hear from you and the Colonel.
Mr. Fonseca, that's precisely the strategic approach that we encourage all of us to take on this. And speaking, let's say, for example, about Canada and the US, you already do a lot to coordinate through the Five Eyes mechanisms. Also, both Canada and the US, you are part of the Quint group. Those are 5 countries that the Ukrainian armed forces cooperate most closely with. And we expect to see even better cooperation. I would also encourage the Canadian parliamentarians who follow the matter to reach out to your American counterparts. And we need you to coordinate, to exchange what you know, and to come up with a good joint vision and with good joint plan on this. And yes, we expect of the Biden administration to have a very strong position on this. And we are very encouraged by the first steps. In the visuals that we shared with you, you can find one slide, number 28, which specifically refers to the American response to this Russian escalation. That is a good sign, but there are plenty more things we should do together.
And from the Colonel, if you would like to comment.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. In this COVID reality, it's quite hard to start this real good exchange of good visit of professionals, analysts, operators from Canada, from Ukraine. That's why we really need this reliable, secure channel of communication, and with a prior focus, especially on security and air defense situation in the area of Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. hybrid threats, that's definitely a challenge. And we are now watching what is going on, both with Colonial Pipeline, with SolarWinds, attacks on Ukrainian critical infrastructure objects in Eastern Ukraine. So far, we are now working on development of our own capabilities, like cyber security centers. And we would like to restart, let's say, visits in future in order to bring more Canadian specialists to Ukraine to show them what we have in Kiev, and of course, to share with knowledge with you here in Canada.
Yeah, so these cyber attacks we're hearing even are affecting us here, affecting municipalities, businesses, where they are taking over, shutting them down, holding them for ransom, and then bribing them. We don't even know how many this is happening to, because a lot are fearful of disclosing that this has happened to their businesses. So, you know, it is really imperative that we be transparent with this and find out where these are coming from. I know Russia has been one that's been isolated where some of these attacks are coming from, or from Russians, but also China and others from other parts of the world. I think we need to work together on this.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree with you. And last comment regarding this issue. In one assessment here in Canada, I saw that cyber attack on a critical object, a critical infrastructure object like heating system or water system in Canada, it could be even worse than all the consequences of COVID-19. That could be really targeted, focused impact.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Fonseca. Merci beaucoup, Colonel. Maintenant, notre quatrième tour de...
Fonseca, thank you, Colonel. It's our first turn of questions.
Finish a complete fourth round. We have to finish at 5:30 because of House of Commons resource constraints tonight. There's also been a request from the ambassador's team to do a quick screenshot at the very end of our time together. So we will go right into our fourth round, and I just encourage all of you to, as you have done, to respect the time limits. Mr. Bazan, please, for 5 minutes.
Didn't realize I was going again. Okay, so thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, we were talking about sanctions earlier, and of course, Canada passed the Magnitsky Act back in 2018, and unfortunately, the government hasn't used it since. Can you talk about how Magnitsky sanctions have worked in not just sending a message to the Kremlin, but to hold those accountable for their support of the war in Donbass, for the illegal annexation and occupation of Crimea, and Russia's, as well as other countries who have, you know, been corrupt and abused human rights around the world?
Mr. Bazan, you know so well all the procedures and the mechanism which stand behind the Magnitsky Act. Thank you for your contribution into passing of that very important piece of legislation, and I would extend that to all the members of the parliament involved. We want the Magnitsky Act to be applied specifically to those very demonstrative and very obvious cases of human rights violations in the occupied territories. I can give you one example. Just today, there was a so-called court decision in Russia to give 6 years of prison to Rifat Chubarov, who is the leader of the Majlis, which is the Crimean Tatar parliament, and that's one of the pieces of this major picture of political repressions against the Crimean Tatars. Those crimes have very clear names associated with the crimes. We are talking about prosecutors, about lawyers, about judges, about those people in the government who are specifically responsible for these repressions. And we want those people to feel that the world is watching. And again, I would like to reassure you that no matter what the Russians say, or no matter what they might bluff about, but the sanctions that already applied, they do hurt. They hurt individuals on a very personal level, and they do hurt the Russia's abilities in general. So we will strongly encourage Canada to explore how we can use the existing instruments, including the Magnitsky Act, to deter Russia.
Thank you for that. You know, we look at what's happening today in Minsk, and there is no doubt some parallels to be drawn from what was happening during Euromaidan and people standing up against a corrupt government under Yanukovych. So you think Russia will become even more aggressive? If Putin and his proxies may show up on the streets of Minsk as well, as they did in showing up in little green men in Crimea?
Yes, and we see that authoritarian regimes are really good in helping each other, and they're really good in best practices exchange, or like worst practices exchange.
Yeah.
And there are very practical results of this close integration of Belarus into the Russian sphere of influence. One of the examples, Lukashenko has finally let the Russians to go ahead with establishing military air bases in Belarus. The Russians now can freely use all the Belarusian facilities for their jets, and that changes the situation in the Western Europe. So I think there is a good chance we'll see more escalation in the European skies, and that creates new threats for Poland, for Slovakia, and for our other neighbors. I just want you to leave with one thought. What you see in Belarus now is this scenario that Putin had for Ukraine in 2014. This is exactly the scenario that Putin has for many other countries to come. And that is why we should see all of this as interconnected pieces.
Why do you think Putin so greatly fears these public protests, these people that are fighting for freedom of the press and for democracy and standing up for human rights? Why does Putin and his kleptocracy in the Kremlin fear this catching hold in the region and possibly in Moscow itself?
There is an obvious reason. He is afraid that Russia and the Russian people will follow the case. Putin has been relatively successful in blocking the civil society of Russia from becoming strong enough and vocal enough. But I think it's quite obvious that it's going to be more and more difficult over years. One day, the refrigerator will win over the TV set. One day, people will realize that there are ways to live better in their country. That's the case with Russia too, one day.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Bazan. Thank you, Ambassador. Ms. Sahota, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. This has been a very enjoyable session. Thank you to the Ambassador for being here today. And I share in the sentiments of a lot of my colleagues and the questions they've posed and the statements and commitments that they've made that, we strongly stand with Ukraine and want to do everything possible to make sure that in your region you will continue to be a fair and free democracy. And I've seen, that you're on many different democracy indexes. The numbers have been rising and there have been many improvements in Ukraine. And I want to congratulate you for the 2019 election. And like some of my colleagues here were there as observers and, stated that it was a great experience. I was also involved, I wasn't able to go there, but I was involved in an internship, a parliamentary internship program here on Parliament Hill, which I do think is a very valuable program. And hopefully after COVID, we can have that program again. But it gave me the opportunity to meet many young people from Ukraine. And although, they are very proud of being Ukrainian and the progress that Ukraine has made, there are a lot of concerns about transparency in the democratic process. When it comes to, the election process, I think there's been many, many improvements, but there is still issues when it comes to political and economic corruption. And I know that I read somewhere about a prominent anti-corruption agency that was created by the government, but then was struck down by a constitutional court as being unconstitutional, and that they were investigating many judges at the time. I wanted to just find out from you, since Ukraine has taken on new measures of economic and political reforms, including anti-corruption reforms in 2014. What is the progress that has been made thus far? In the areas where maybe there is still more progress to make, what is the plan moving forward? And just to, highlight again some of the areas, it's the rule of law, independent judiciary, even when it comes to freedom of press and LGBTQ rights, those are still major concerns and issues, and especially for, civil society groups in Ukraine. So if I could have your answer on those things, thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think this in many ways reflects the agenda that the Ukrainian government has. Again, we cooperate with Canada on many of those directions. And I would like to refer specifically to this anti-corruption situation. So you refer to this one very specific episode when the Constitutional Court decided that it's illegal to require public servants and politicians to declare their benefits and their expenditures. And that decision literally took Ukrainian people to the streets. And the reaction of the public and across the political class was so strong, so powerful, that this decision by the Constitutional Court was reviewed. And now any citizen of Ukraine can clearly see what money Ukrainian politicians and bureaucrats make and how they spend them. So that really shows you what the Ukrainian people feel about this and what makes me very optimistic about the Ukrainian reforms in the future. As of the moment, all our anti-corruption institutions work. That includes anti-corruption court and the special anti-corruption prosecutor's office. We hope they will show very strong and visible result in the nearest future. One last sentence, I would like to acknowledge the success of the Canada-Ukraine parliamentary program. I know that many of the parliamentarians here have had Ukrainian interns in their offices. I want to reassure that a major investment into a successful Ukraine. Those people have returned to Ukraine to become members of parliament, ministers, and influential civil society leaders. That's a wonderful program which we would like to see being continued.
Yeah, it's absolutely a wonderful program. I know there has been, some success in the banking sector. There's more transparency now as to ownership over the banks and different corporations. But I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to the freedom of press issue as well.
And just a brief answer, please, Ambassador.
We strongly believe in the free press, and even in the darker times, Ukraine was well known as a country with very strong appetite for free press and with very strong push against any signs of censorship. I hope it will stay that way.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Madame Sahota. Merci, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur. Monsieur Bergeron,
Monsieur Bergeron, you have the floor for 2 minutes and a half. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Your Excellency, you've shown to us that the Normandy Initiative and the Minsk agreements had no impact whatsoever on the Crimea situation. So in order to fill in the gap, President Zelensky wants to announce this kind of platform, the Crimea platform. It has to be announced this summer on August the 1st if all goes well. We'll not ask you to give us some secrets here, but what is expected with this platform? Diplomatic, military, economic actions, and others, so that Crimea could come back under the realm of Ukraine. Mr. Bergeron.
Just given very good assessment of the reasons why we want to go ahead with the Crimean platform. I can give you a very practical example. It's about the sanctions. So as of the moment, both the European Union and our major allies outside of the European Union have applied sanctions against Russia and those individuals responsible for the occupation and for the human rights violation. But the way we do sanctions is so different. we assess the situation in different ways. We apply the sanctions in different ways, and we have very different ways to monitor the implementation of the sanctions. We feel that it's long overdue to make sure that we coordinate on this. And if we share our practices, and if we bring our efforts together in monitoring the situation on the ground, if we monitor together how the sanctions are implemented, they can provide much greater impact on the ground. And Canada will be a rock star among those nations because you are quite good in actually following those policies.
Est-ce que je comprends dans le non-dit de votre réponse?
If I understand, if I read between the lines, Your Excellency, the heart of this strategy or of this international platform for Crimea, this coordination that you wish for actions taken by a great number of countries against Russia to make sure that the impact be multiplied and that eventually the results be there for real, including for Donbass and Crimea.
That is very fair, and that should be very efficient if we think about different avenues of cooperation: security, human rights, economic policy, and so on. We hope this will bring us closer to a good, successful strategic vision.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Bergeron. Thank you, Ambassador. Mr. Harris, please, for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And Mr. Ambassador, you experienced, along with the rest of the world, this pandemic for the last year and a bit. Can you tell us what the experience has been in Ukraine? How has it impacted your country? How has the circumstances been in both in all of Ukraine, but also particularly in the Donbass region? What do you have by way of a vaccine program? Is it working? Is there something that the international community is doing or can do to help?
Thank you for this question, and I guess it's a concern that all of us share, no matter which part of the ocean we live in, or what side of the ocean we live in. Well, Ukraine has a relatively good start in the beginning of the pandemic. We successfully delayed the first hit of the virus last year. Then the situation became much worse, and it is still very troublesome. In Ukraine, only about 5% of the population have been vaccinated so far. We're talking about the first dose, less than 5%, which means we still have so much work to do. And we're struggling to find enough vaccines to go ahead with the vaccination. And you very rightly asked me about the Donbass. I think that's the area that we should be very concerned about. Obviously, the medical infrastructure along the front line and in the occupied territories has been destroyed or is close to non-existence. There is a big risk that we might face a humanitarian catastrophe in that specific region. Finally, I want to acknowledge that we cooperate with Canada on COVID-related issues. We share the Canadian approach that we should eliminate all the barriers for free flow of medical supplies and vaccines. We have done our steps when it was necessary to remove the barriers, and we are going to cooperate in the future.
For one brief second, is there COVAX circumstances in that plan of any help to Ukraine?
Yes, but as you can imagine, it's a very small amount that we are getting from there, which is not even closely enough to cover the demand.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Harris. We will now go to Ms. Stubbs. Welcome to the committee. The floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and hello, Ambassador. I've had 3 Ukrainian interns in my office, and there's strong Ukrainian heritage, many families, communities, and 2 sister cities with Ukrainian lakeland. You may know that Vegreville, which is home to the world's largest freestanding Pesika, has hosted the Ukrainian Chamber, sent counselors to Ukraine as election monitors, and has donated firefighting supplies and funds to Ukraine and to Crimea. So I'm pleased to be here on behalf of Lakeland. In Canada, there are many examples of Putin's government actively conducting misinformation campaigns on social media and elsewhere. And I just wonder, to what extent is that happening in Ukraine, and what actions are being taken to combat it?
Thank you very much. I would specifically refer to the propaganda portion of the visual presentation that you have. It starts with slide 19. And if you look through those quotes from the Russian propaganda leaders, that pretty much tells you how seriously they have taken this situation. And on slide 22, you might see this cartoon with NATO and with some very horrible, terrible death pictures. And those of us who remember how the Soviet propaganda worked, this clearly reminded me the old days of the Cold War, when the Soviet regime spent and invested huge resources in actually this propaganda effort against its key Western opponents. And finally, the Russians have spread something which they call the list of the worst enemies of the Russian Federation. There are 10 countries on that list. That includes, of course, Ukraine, and it includes Canada. And Russia has officially said that they're considering the ways they're going to make our lives more difficult. So we'll see what is to come.
Can you comment on the pulse of the current public perception of the conflict there? Has Ukrainian perceptions changed or evolved?
I think we can see how the Kremlin can increase and decrease its activities when it comes to propaganda. For the obvious reasons, they increased this propaganda activity against Ukraine and the allies this year. And there were two major avenues of their propaganda. First, they presented Ukraine to their public as a major threat to the Russian security. So they would tell that sooner or later Ukraine is going to invade Russia. And second, they also presented Ukraine as a puppet state in the hands of the United States, Canada, and other countries. And they tried to scare the Russian public with this NATO invasion through Ukraine. One way or another, I think it's obvious that one of the reasons why Putin wanted to do this is to change the subject in the news. And the Navalny protests were a major concern for the Russian government. Also, they have an upcoming parliamentary election this fall. So probably with all these escalation activities, one of the reasons Putin wanted to go ahead with that is to solve his domestic problems and to get some domestic results.
Mm. And to follow up on a question asked earlier by Mr. Chong regarding the IRGC, I just wonder if you could speak to the importance of the international community acting in a coordinated way to condemn their actions.
It's critically important. And let me say this, we cannot allow those criminals who shut down the plane to hide behind state secrets, or we cannot allow the Iranian government to hide the criminals from the international prosecution. Going to the international court is one of the options. Ukraine has a very impressive experience of dealing with such tragedies, and I can refer you to the MH17 situation. In fact, in Ukraine, it's the same investigation team which now deals with PS 752. So going back to your question, it's very important that we speak with one voice. It's very important that we together get to the bottom of this terrible tragedy.
Thank you, Ms. Stubbs. That's just about your time. Thank you very much for being with us. Final set of questions. Thank you. Final set of questions this afternoon goes to Dr. Fry. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I know I don't have 5 minutes because we've got to leave on the dot. But I just wanted to follow up with with a simple question, and that is about this PS 752. I know that many people in Canada, because Canada had the majority of people on that flight, are asking for Canada to go with like-minded people to the United Nations Security Council and to demand an independent investigation. I'd like to know what you think about that. And before you answer, just wanted to take the opportunity, because I told you what a beautiful city Kiev is, but I wanted to also take the opportunity to say that I was most impressed. I was at both presidential elections, the runoff, and then, of course, the main presidential election. And what impressed me so much was I saw infrastructure, of course, in Ukraine is terrible, but I saw 90-year-olds climbing 25 steps to go and vote. Although your voting system was extraordinary, you had the ability to go to their homes if they were elderly and arthritic. They wanted to go and vote, and your turnout. If Canada could learn about that commitment to democracy, that commitment to free and fair elections, that desire that the Ukrainians have for really ensuring that they were able to vote and to make their vote count, I thought that was really, really, really important. And I was impressed and quite moved by it, frankly, and thought maybe we could get some Ukrainian seniors to come and tell Canadians about going to the ballots during their elections. I don't know if we could do that. But anyway, I just wanted you to answer the question for me about the PS 752. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'll just say briefly, we still have homework to do when it comes to cooperation of our own law enforcement agencies in investigating PS 752, and that's what we are determined to do. I'm not much enthusiastic about the United Nations and the Security Council as long as Russia has a veto right in the Security Council.
Yes.
But again, we will find our ways to investigate and get to the bottom of this together with Canada. And Chair, I feel that this is probably about the end of our conversation. I just would like to use this as an opportunity to say thank you to all the members of the committees. I think it was an extraordinary conversation, and I hope this will help you to make well-informed decisions in the interest of the Canadian public. Your support is very touching and is very important to us.
Dr. Fry, thank you very much. Unless you have another question, I'd like to thank you for that intervention.
I don't, but I was going to say how important it is for us to have had this discussion and to know that it would be so very important to have Ukraine as a part of an Eastern European democratic country committed to all of the rules of international rules and all of the tenets of democracy. It would be such a pleasure to have you right there being in that most important strategic position. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fry. Thank you very much. And colleagues, that takes us to the end of our time with our witnesses this afternoon. On our collective behalf, I would like to thank His Excellency Ambassador Shevchenko, Colonel Siromacha, and Mr. Lyashenko for their time. This was about the friendship between our countries. This was about shared values, but in great part, it was also about substance. We had a very fulsome discussion over the 2 hours, and we're extremely grateful for your time and your testimony this afternoon. Ambassador, I understand that just before we disconnect, your team has asked for a screenshot, so I would like to encourage all members who would like to be in that screenshot to come on in. And I'm assuming we have somebody, or maybe multiple people from our teams who will take that shot, and maybe we can just get a signal from them once it's done. I'm getting a thumbs up from the clerk. So everybody just hold a smile, and we will do our screenshots.